Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dottie Conway-LeBron with the McSilver Institute, along with the Community Technical Assistance Center and Managed Care Technical Assistance Center. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Autism Spectrum Disorders, Early Childhood to School Age. Today's webinar is the second part of a three-part offering on autism spectrum disorders. Last week, if you chimed in, you would have participated in the first part, which covered children from infancy to toddler age. I'm happy to welcome today's presenters from the Marcus Autism Center during this month of April, which is Autism Awareness Month. Cheryl Rhodes is the Director of Care Coordination at the Marcus Autism Center and has over 30 years of clinical advocacy and research training experience on behalf of children with disabilities and their families. And we also have Dr. Cheryl Clayman, who is the Senior Psychologist at the Marcus Autism Center. She's been working in the field of autism spectrum disorders since 1993. Dr. Clayman was an associate research scientist at Yale for 6 years prior to moving to California and working at the Children's Health Council, where she was a staff psychologist and then became the Director of Autism and Developmental Disabilities Multidisciplinary Team. And finally, as a part of the awesome Marcus Center team that we have with us today, we have Shannon Hewitt, who is a parent of a young child with autism. She's also a research coordinator within the Behavioral Analysis Research Core at the Marcus Autism Center. Prior to her son's autism diagnosis at age 2, Shannon worked as a behavioral interventionist for public schools. So we're really, really excited to hear from all of you today. And I don't want to hesitate to get us started, but I just want to cover a few things just to make sure all of our audience is aware how to effectively participate. So I just want to make sure you know about our WebEx system. Please note that upon joining the webinar, you've been placed on mute to avoid any background noises that may distract others from listening to the presentation. And if you come across any technical issues during today's event, please chat to the host, and she'll be able to assist you. And in case you're not aware, have a look at the right-hand side of your screen, and you'll find the chat box feature. And if it's not visible, you can just click on the dialog bubble on the top right toolbar, and it should appear. In order to ensure that we're able to present as many questions as time permits, we're requesting that you send in your questions at any point during the webinar, and we will answer them during the question and answer portion of today's webinar. And with that, let's get started. Dr. Clayman.
Great. Thank you so much, and thanks for that introduction, Dottie. It's a pleasure for us to be here chatting with everyone today, and we look forward to whatever questions will come at the end as well. So as Dottie said, we're going to be talking mostly about issues to consider when evaluating and treating children with autism from the preschool through school age period. Just to start, just to let you know that some of the information that we'll be presenting today has been published in some various journals, and some of it's noted here, and we'll note some of it as well throughout if you're interested in going to get more information. So just to also tell you about our learning objectives, we just have a few to really understand the impact that autism might have on the family and society, to talk about some treatments that are out there and how to evaluate the effectiveness of some treatments, and then really to spend time reflecting on the role of clinicians and how we can support and empower families of children on the autism spectrum. So first, just quickly to go over what is autism so that we're on the same page. But what we know about autism is that it's a neurodevelopmental disorder of genetic origin, though we don't know the clear links of the genetics at this point. But symptoms do tend to unfold over the first few years of a child's life. And those symptoms include the following. We need to see impairments in social skills, and that's the primary core of the disorder. There can be impairments in language and communication. And then children also have restricted interest, repetitive behaviors, difficulties with transitions, and the like. So those are the areas that we look at when we're making a diagnosis of autism. In terms of the prevalence of autism, the CDC has issued prevalence ratios right now, and we're at about 1 in 68 individuals with autism has an autism spectrum disorder. There's a difference between males and females where it's more common in boys than in girls, and that's about 4.5 or so to 1 for more boys than girls. If you have a child on the autism spectrum, subsequent siblings are about 20% more likely to also have an autism spectrum disorder. When we think about the broad spectrum of autism, we can have kids that are very verbally functioning to kids that don't have much language at all. We also have the range of cognitive from kids that can be exceedingly bright to kids that have more cognitive impairments. And currently that rate of cognitive impairments is at about 38%. So about 30% of individuals with autism also have comorbid intellectual difficulties. There's also a higher risk of seizures in individuals with autism. Most of the seizure risk is either, in early childhood, or again, there's another peak in later adolescence. Currently, and the CDC has just issued some new numbers for our median age of diagnosis, and nicely we are getting better in identifying kids earlier. And the current prevalence is at about, 4.1 years of age. So we're getting a little bit better with that. We just got these numbers in the last day or so. The problem is that in disadvantaged populations, those kids are still identified at a much older rate. So now we have prevalence or issues at around 7 to 8 years of age is when they are identified, which is much, much older and outside of the window when we really want to make sure kids are getting early intervention. And this is even more striking with the fact that about 80% of parents are expressing concern by 24 months. So it's taking a really long time for a family to be able to see concerns and then get some answers for what's going on with their child. We do also know that autism can be reliably diagnosed by 18 to 24 months of age. So as soon as parents have concern, we really should be able to see their children and help them identify what's going on. And so why is it important to know about autism? So as I said, the prevalence is at about 1 in 68 children right now. And that's much higher than if we think of kids with congenital heart defects, juvenile diabetes, and all sorts of cancers. It's more prevalent than all of those combined. The other thing that's important to know is that it's a really expensive disorder to treat. The lifetime cost of care for a child with autism is about $3.5 million, and that's a societal cost of about $137 billion. And we'll talk a little bit about how we can start to reduce some of those costs. But a lot of that comes really as we can diagnose kids earlier and earlier. And so if we think about that, if we have parents' concerns between 1.5 and 2 years of age, then it takes, at least a year, if not longer, for a professional to be able to see that child. And then, oh, thank you, sorry. I'll move a little bit closer to the mic. I can see the chat box. And then the average age of diagnosis, again, is right around that 4 years of age. And so one of the things that we're doing at the Marcus Autism Center is trying to find new ways to be able to identify children with autism. Because one of the things that we know, besides the fact that parents might have concerns, is when a parent might have a concern, it can take a long time just to be sitting on a waiting list or searching to find someone to be able to see their child. And so we're here trying to do a lot of research into trying to better find ways to identify autism earlier. So one of our and we have many research programs, so one of them is really trying to look at what a child is attending to when they're looking in their environment. So that's what we call standing behind a person's eyes. And we do this by using some innovative technology, which we refer to as our eye tracking technology. So what we can do is look at what an individual is looking at when they're watching a scene, and then map those two together so we can see what they're looking at and and map those two between their eyes and the video screen. So I'll show you some examples of that. So here's an example. This study was done in older adolescents and adults, and you can see it's the movie clip from Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. So we don't show that to our younger kiddos. But here's a typically developing child. And there's a crosshair that you're going to see, and it's just a white crosshair. There's no volume to this video. And what you'll see is that crosshair is going back and forth between the speaker's eyes. So if you can play that, Brianna, we can watch it. It's starting at the man's face. You can see it now go to the woman and back to the man and back and forth. And so this is what typically developing viewers seem to be attending to when they're watching these naturalistic video scenes. And we can then again play the next one, Brianna, which is going to be a viewer with autism watching the same movie. And so what we can see here, again, that crosshair is going back and forth between the speaker's mouths. And what this means is an individual with autism is certainly paying attention to the movie, but they're paying attention to different parts of the movie than an individual that does not have autism. And if you think about social development and emotions and social context, so much happens between an individual's eyes that if all you're doing is paying attention to the mouth, you're missing a lot of the social context. So when we put that together, and this was published a while ago in the American Journal of Psychiatry, what we see is that typically developing viewers, again, go back and forth mostly between the eyes, and individuals with autism spend more time at the mouth and also off body. So what we said is, what would toddlers look like if they're watching scenes at the time period when we want to capture autism as it's starting to unfold? And so our work was published in 2008, and what we found was toddlers showed the exact same pattern as those adolescents and adults, where individuals without autism were going back and forth between the eyes, and individuals with autism were going back and forth between the mouth and off object, or on other objects. So then Ami, Klan, and Warren Jones wanted to say, let's follow kids from birth who are at higher risk for autism. So they have a sibling on the autism spectrum. Let's follow these infants from 2 months of age all the way through till 3 years of age so that we can try and see what their eye tracking patterns look like and how it's unfolding over time. So they published this article in 2013 in Nature, and I'm going to just summarize some of the findings for you. So here you can see on this graph is along the x-axis is the age in months. So it starts out at 2 months and goes up to 24 months when we're able to clinically make a diagnosis of autism. And going up the y-axis is the percent fixation time an individual is going to spend on the eyes. So that blue line is an individual that does not go on to have autism, so a typically developing individual. And where's my red line? And there comes the red line, and what we can see is that over time, individuals with autism spend less time focusing on eyes. And this change seems to happen at about 6 months of age, and then it increases all the way up through 24 months of age. So again, we can see this as the unfolding of autism over time. We're not talking about making a diagnosis here. We're just trying to understand some of the things that might start to happen as autism is unfolding over time. And so what one of our goals is we're thinking about things that pediatricians can use as tools, is they're already really familiar with things like height and weight growth charts. So if we can be mapping what we're calling social visual engagement, can we have a social visual engagement growth chart that can map a child's development over time, and we can start to see if they're falling off that curve, what can we do? Can we start our interventions earlier so as to mitigate the effects that some of this difficulty attending to social information might have over time? So when we think about some of the research that we're doing and research that others are doing out there all across the world, what we're knowing is that our understanding of autism continues to evolve. If we think about the rates of intellectual impairment that kids used to have, we've greatly reduced the impact of cognitive impairments over time. It used to be about 3/4 of individuals had and now we're at about 38%. So our understanding of autism continues to evolve. And what that means is that we just need to kind of be on top of things, so we're not telling parents that they have to wait until 4 years of age, for example, that they can get their child evaluated earlier. The other thing that happens is that there's so much research going out there that almost every day a new treatment opportunity pops up for us to be kind of considering for kids on the autism spectrum. And that can be really daunting. We're enmeshed in the autism world here, and we still can't keep up with all the stuff that's coming out all the time. But the good news is that there's lots of information out there that can help us focus on those interventions that have effectiveness. And if you just consider it, we expect if we went in and we had a medical issue and we needed to get treated for cancer, for example, we expect the health professionals that we're going to be up to date on the medications and the treatments out there to help us treat the disorder. We should have the same expectations for people who are serving individuals with autism. And why it's so important, we talked about the lifetime costs of autism. We can reduce those costs if we choose interventions that have evidence of effectiveness. So we're not wasting our time recommending and parents' resources going to treatments that we know can be ineffective or even harmful. And because it's not possible to be experts in all the available treatments, what we need to do is really focus our attention on resources on those which have shown to be effective. And so here's just going to be some highlight. I'm not going to go over a lot of them because you can find these in the various reports that are listed here and others, but they help us choose treatments that can be shown to be effective. So the National Research Council put together characteristics of what they describe as effective programs. So they really say that intervention needs to begin early. We really recommend intervention beginning before the age of 3 or at 3 so that children have time to be in early intervention programs and stuff before school. We need intensity in our interventions. We need families that are actively involved. We need highly specialized staff, et cetera, et cetera. These are all really highlighted in the NRC's reports. And it is important to be aware of what we call snake oil salesmen. The research really helps us understand what's going on. And when you see treatments out there that are going to promise a cure, which we know we don't have, those are dangerous treatments. When they cost a ton of money and they promise a lot of things, those are the ones we tell parents to be really wary of. The other things that happen is if you don't recommend or use an empirically validated treatment, you're going to be more vulnerable to lawsuits. So insurance companies and others can be more, and parents can be more likely to sue you if you're not recommending an empirically validated treatment. So here's some of them that come out. This is from the newest NRC report of established evidence-based practices. So we talked about behavioral interventions, cognitive behavioral interventions, and the like. You can see them all there. They also go through emerging interventions. So these are ones that have some research, but they didn't meet the level of research necessary for them to be able to say that it's effective. And then there's a list of ones that are unestablished. And so these are the ones that don't have enough research out there to say that they're going to be helpful for kids on the autism spectrum. We know, for example, though, that lots of parents are on a gluten-free, casein-free diet. And what we need nutritional support to make sure they're getting the proper nutrition. We know lots of our kids already have picky eating and things like that, so we don't want to make them pickier eaters by putting them on gluten and casein-free diets. So we just want to make sure that some of these, if our parents are doing them, that they're monitored closely. And now I'm going to pass it on over to Cheryl Rose to talk a little bit more about, from a family's perspective, what it's like to receive an autism diagnosis.
Hello. You may not be able to see the graphic that's there, but the T-shirt says, "This is not the life I ordered." And often when a family receives an autism diagnosis, there's a lot of new learning and adjustment that needs to take place. I'm going to highlight a few of these, and then Shannon Hewitt is going to talk about her experiences. This is a quote. Again, it's not easy. It's not necessarily that your life is going to be bad, but it will be different. And for a lot of families, there's a lot of new learning, a lot of terminology. Again, this may be the same for other conditions, but it's certainly true for autism. At the time of diagnosis, parents' concerns can be put into two buckets. What can we do to help our child, and what is the prognosis? When we think about what parents want to know, these are just some quotes that I've heard from families. Parents really need to learn skills and strategies in many areas. What we're doing is we're preparing our parents for a long-term involvement. What's true is that over time, families will transition from service to service or program to program, but the parent is the one true constant in the child's life. And so therefore, it's very important for us as much as possible to start early with giving parents the skills and strategies that they need so that they can help their children. Those are some of the areas that we need to look at. Any parent who has a child on the spectrum will talk and let you know about the importance of speaking up, and how for many parents that's very different than what they're used to doing. They're not used to challenging and questioning, especially either in the healthcare or educational systems. Looking at how to maximize financial resources. Again, a lot of families are not used to requesting assistance and yet may find themselves in a position to do that. And they also may find that there are roadblocks to accessing services, and families need to have more information to be able to get past those. The immediate and long-term challenges for the families are, again, finding the right educational services, identifying community resources, optimizing opportunities for success, and then realizing the personal goals. These will differ from child to family, but yet this is true for all families. Parents worry. For some families, receiving the diagnosis is actually a relief. If you look at the first quote, I hear this a lot. I had a sense that something was wrong. We hear about autism, but then when it's applied to your child, the first thing a lot of parents will do is turn to the internet. If you go to the internet today, there are somewhere between 4 and 5 million different citations that have to do with autism. I always caution parents that the first few that all say ad next to them may not be the ones that will take them to the most trusted or reliable information. And so what used to be a deficit of information is now information overload. And so what Cheryl Clayman was talking about before in terms of evidence-based practices, not only do we need to give our families information, but we have to have them be able to do some evaluating so that they can choose information that's going to lead them in the right direction and not take them off course. There's also going to be a balance between the individual and the family needs. And it's very important that we start early to look at opportunities to care for the caregiver. I'll talk about these in a while, but again, when we look at autism, this is not a condition that affects an individual, but an entire family system. And so therefore, we have to take that into consideration again from the very, very beginning. And then transitions and futures planning is critical for families across many, many different systems and programs. So Shannon's going to bring this down to the real world level by talking about her experiences and introducing you to her son, TJ.
So, hello. So this is a part of a blog of one of the parents whose child was diagnosed here, and she said that what no one had warned her about was the emotional side of this, wanting others to see just how amazing and awesome your kid is, but realizing that some only see what they deem as wrong with him. She talks about feelings of helplessness and loneliness, and I think that every parent of a child with autism can relate to this, and we all have the same fears and worries. And when I had concerns, I started a blog of my own, and this was in May of 2013 when TJ was 4 months away from turning 3. He was a typical healthy baby, but he was a slow crawler and a slow walker. He didn't start crawling until he was almost 1, and he didn't walk until 19 months. but he was happy and affectionate, and he made eye contact. So I really had no concerns about his development up until this time. He was almost 3, and he was only babbling, and he didn't call me mommy. So I remember looking up some of his behaviors online, and I would just get a sinking feeling every time things pointed to autism. So I told his pediatrician my fears, and she suggested speech therapy, which we couldn't afford, so I arranged to get him services from Babies Can't Wait. He received speech therapy from them for about 5 months, and I didn't see any progress. So then we were referred to a neurological specialist who then referred us here to the Marcus Center, which had a 6 to 8 month waiting list. So while I was waiting for TJ's appointment at Marcus, I found out about a research study at Emory University that needed children between the ages of 1 and 5 who had been referred to a developmental center but had not been diagnosed with autism, which described TJ perfectly. They did all the diagnostic tests for free, and then a few days later, I received a phone call telling me that TJ did, in fact, have autism. And this is what I wrote that day on my blog. Well, we finally have our answer. TJ has been diagnosed with autism. Even though I suspected this, hearing the doctor say it has hit me pretty hard. I can't stop crying because now it is real. But I'm only allowing myself to be sad about it today. Tomorrow, I'll be making plans, making phone calls, and doing research. TJ's little life is about to get really difficult. He has a long road ahead of him, but I know that he is wonderful and amazing, and he's going to show everyone what he is made of. And after that day, I did everything. We went gluten-free, which didn't work and was very expensive. I found out about an ABA program at the University of Georgia, which was fantastic, but it didn't last very long. We did music therapy, story time at the library, and even hippotherapy, which he hated. I began to realize that I didn't have to do every therapy I could find for TJ. I just had to find 1 or 2 effective treatments and stick to those. And then after he was diagnosed, a few months later, I started working here at the Marcus Autism Center, and I found out about a study that Dr. Nathan Call and some colleagues here had done that examined the treatment choices of parents of children with autism. This study had parents distribute tokens representing time, money, and energy among treatments that they were currently using and treatments they would use if they had fewer constraints. The results showed that participants were currently using an average of 11.4 different treatments for their child, and if there were no constraints, they would use an average of 53.7 treatments. And I realized that is exactly how the category that I fell into, and it made me wonder how parents are supposed to know what treatments are best. And that is what I think is so great about what we do here at the Marcus Autism Center, is we have clinicians and speech-language pathologists that are available to give advice and recommendations. And then we have a wonderful program called the Care Coordination Department that has been a lifesaver to me, because you don't just need questions answered at the time of diagnosis, you need resources and advice at so many different stages. So that has been helpful to me. Today, TJ is 6 years old and in kindergarten, and like I said, as time passes, there are new victories that we celebrate and milestones that he reaches, and then there are also new challenges. TJ has been in a self-contained classroom for pre-K and for kindergarten, and it's a small classroom. He's in a class with all children with autism. There are 6 children in this class with 3 teachers. So these classrooms were created to foster enhanced support for students with special needs, and this is a great environment for my child. He gets more support and gets help with not only academics, but personal and social development. He has wonderful teachers. They use applied behavior analysis. This year they have started a picture exchange communication system with him, where verbal skills are taught using prompting and reinforcement strategies, and he is now speaking in sentences for the first time ever. But there are some things that I wish I'd known when we first started this journey. I wish I'd known how long the road to diagnosis would be. I wish I had known to concentrate on the quality of treatment and to look for research-based treatments and how to find those treatments. I had no idea how organized I was going to have to be and how tough I was going to have to be to advocate for my child. It's very outside of my personality, but I've had to get really tough. And then I wish I'd known at the beginning, you know, who to turn to for advice and assistance. And then there are some things that were better that I didn't know at the time, that TJ may become aggressive, which he has displayed some aggressive behaviors that have developed over the years. I didn't know that he would begin to stim. He likes to shake pipe cleaners and straws in the air, and he just really enjoys doing that. He does have some self-injurious behaviors. He bites his hand and bangs his head, but we're working on those. I'm glad I didn't know how difficult it would be to toilet train him. And then I'm glad I didn't really realize that everything would be a battle. His autism presents many challenges, but everyone has challenges. He's happy and healthy, and he's so special, and his autism is part of what makes him so special, and I wouldn't change him for the world.
Now we're just going to pass it back over to Cheryl Rhodes to talk about some of systems of care and care coordination.
So I think that Shannon's talk helped you see what it's like at the individual level. And one thing that we say a lot is that if you've seen one child with autism, or you know one child with autism, you know one child with autism. However, on the other hand, we can look at a macro level that all families have to navigate complex systems from the time of diagnosis, and that this becomes a challenge and a process that will continue over time. So I'd like to just highlight those very quickly. These are not specific to autism, but are some that affect individuals with disabilities. Of course, at the center is the individual and the family, and the very first areas of effort are involved with diagnosis. Again, as Shannon mentioned, finding those interventions that work, continuing with treatment, hopefully even finding out how to access support, such as the others that we mentioned before, respite, which leads us to the care and support. And there are a number of different processes and programs and services that come into play as families start to move out into the broader world. At a larger level, there are legal protections and legislation that impact families of children with autism and families of children with disabilities in general, such as ADA and IDEA. And then at the policy level, we have governmental and professional oversight and protection. So one family may interact with one treatment team, but yet these broader systems within a community, a state, and across our nation also impact the quality of life for that one family. The categories of services and supports start with, again, defining the needs and abilities of the individual, and then defining and identifying treatment, intervention, and education services. What we find quite often is that although there are guidelines for these efforts, there's tremendous amount of variability from school district to school district, from program to program, and even regionally and nationally as well. We have some programs in place that are specifically designed to give care and support to family. The waivers are usually associated with Medicaid. Some of these are national programs, but the way that they're implemented varies from state to state. Support groups, transitions, financial planning, and advocacy and protection, again, through legislation and health and disability policy action. So care and support, just to give you some ideas, you can see how broad and extensive it is. There's education, medical, behavioral health, many, many different kinds of public and private funding. Transition includes both early transition from early intervention and preschool special education all the way through later transition, which is secondary to post-secondary. Social, vocational training and employment, recreation, housing, and here in Georgia, there's been a real emphasis on both post-secondary options for individuals with autism. We now have about 6 or 7 universities that have both degree granting and certificate-based programs that offer individuals on the spectrum support to have a college experience, as well as vocational training programs that lead to meaningful employment. And then the other area is social, and that continues over into independent living options and housing. Legal, again, in some states, 32, there are, and more states are coming online, there are insurance mandates for autism services. They vary tremendously. There's no uniformity. Some have caps on dollar amounts, some have caps on age. So, for example, the new one that was passed in Georgia last year called AVIS Law is a state-mandated insurance coverage that includes ABA, but it has a $30,000 cap, and it's for children under the age of 6. So that means, de facto, a huge segment of the population who could be helped by these services are shut out. And then we get into access, and we look at these, again, on an individual level, but also on a societal level. One of the things that we've actually looked at before we move on to policy here at our center and other centers for autism across the country is just the actual physical environment of our building. And it's been quite interesting to look and see how centers have looked at how the physical environment affects individuals with autism, both in terms of materials that are used, facilitating wayfinding, the light bulbs, the paint colors, and I'm very pleased to see that we're part of that effort here in Georgia. Policy, there are a number of different groups, and then for professional associations, if you look across the disciplines, both AAP, American Academy of Pediatrics, APA, Psychology, and Psychiatry, have developed policy statements and guidelines that help move the practice forward in terms of early identification, screening, and treatment. It's very important to talk to parents in a way that makes parents feel comfortable. The reason that I say that is there was actually a report from that was done. It was a large convenience sample through the American Academy of Pediatrics that asked parents about their behaviors in terms of using complementary and alternative medicine. It was not autism specific, but it was for children with disabilities. And many parents reported that both they did not tell their doctors, but yet 60% or more actually had tried one or more. There's a whole range of things, from diet to other kinds of treatments, massage therapy, hippotherapy, etc. But yet underreported these. So I think that it's important to be open and receptive so that you can have a parent tell you what they're doing, and then you can discuss in a very clear way what makes sense and does not for a family. It's important for us also to warn families about empty claims. So, for example, what we've done here at our center is develop some materials for families about how to evaluate and identify evidence-based treatments. We're not telling a parent which treatment to use or which is the best, but these are some questions, for example, that we just encourage families to ask. Another one is often, do you get periodic assessments, and are you able to observe the treatment sessions? Is your child like going to therapy? And that there's just, again, the idea that the parents should have a right to ask. This picture is actually Shannon's family, so you get to meet them. We sponsored an event at the aquarium. Family support and family quality of life is very, very important. This definition comes from the Georgia Autism Plan. We do have an interagency autism council that's developed a plan for the state of Georgia with indicators across 12 domains. And the highlighted words strengthen what we really think of when we think about family support. We want to strengthen, enhance, and make it possible for families to thrive. And again, these are the quality indicators for family support from the Georgia plan, and I think that these are really good indicators for those of us who are working with families who have children on the spectrum to consider as you're developing services and supports going forward. So the quality of life indicators include competence, knowledge, alliances, cohesion, and well-being. These come actually not from the Georgia plan, but from a measure that was developed by Robin McWilliam several years ago to look at young children who have families who have young children on the spectrum. And again, what they discovered was, sorry, I'm not going to go back, but that families did have needs for support in one or more areas. Oftentimes, what families find is that they have a great job of getting formal supports or accessing those formal supports, i.e. through agencies and community programs, but where there are gaps and deficits are those informal supports. And for most of us, those are the things that really do affect quality of life and the extent to which a family feels like they belong and that they can reduce that sense of isolation. So what can we do, and what can we have parents do to make changes? There are some very key advocacy roles for professionals, and there's a continuum. You can start on an individual level, you can get engaged with local activities or state or federal level activities. And again, those of you who are working in the field, all of the national professional associations and autism organizations do have opportunities for engagement, and there's federal legislative action that can benefit from our continued support as well. We can also empower families by giving them information about systems, about helping them identify the current needs and identifying services that not only help the current needs, but also help them address the next steps of what they'll be facing next. We can also help families learn how to access appropriate services and how to advocate. You heard Shannon say it's really typical that parents are just not used to being put in that situation where they have to ask, and they have to ask in a more forceful way, at least one that goes beyond the comfort zone of many, many families. And we want them to feel confident and competent to be able to do that. As professionals, you want to be able to know what those community referral sites are. You want to be able to know how to refer a family as needed and where to refer them to. Again, you want to be able to help anticipate and prepare for educational and medical transitions, and encourage families to contact local chapters of family support and advocacy organizations so that they can connect with other families. That's often the best step at learning about resources, reducing isolation, and improving family well-being. For professionals, again, you want to help families stay engaged. We want families to have access to programs for typical children. We want them to feel comfortable in those environments. We've actually been fortunate here at the center to be consulted, requested for consultation from the Children's Museum, some of the sports programs in town who really want to welcome. We've actually been working with the new Braves Stadium here for baseball, and they've done a lot to try to make sure that families who have children with autism feel comfortable in the stadium, have quiet spaces, have support for wayfinding, for privacy, for bathrooms for children who are older and still need assistance with toileting and the like. And it's been very exciting for us to then see how that translates into families feeling really comfortable out and about in the community. Action steps for families. Families, again, need knowledge and skills. They need to learn about parent advocacy programs that are available, and then they need to develop their own competencies. And that may be connecting them with programs such as Partners in Policymaking or groups such as Autism Speaks. But there are resources out there so that our parents can become, again, more competent and confident. The resource that's cited here is from Autism Speaks, and it's got some really good tips for parents. Okay, so what we've learned and what we know is take-home messages that we can reliably diagnose the autism by age 2, and that having technology and clinically based measures allow us to improve detection within the first year of life. Clinicians need to be well informed about risk factors for autism in order to best inform parents and caregivers about next steps. We're still hearing, and hopefully it's less and less, parents saying that their primary care provider told them to wait. Every time I hear it, I feel like it just really is difficult, and I'm sure there are people out there listening to this who are shaking their heads because we know that waiting is not the right approach. We need to also be sensitive about how to communicate risk to parents, especially for those situations where a parent already has a child with autism. It's not that we don't communicate that information, but that we really need to have an extraordinary amount of sensitivity to how the parent will experience that information. And children will likely need multiple evaluations across development to assess and reassess strengths, deficits, and what the proper intervention is, both at school and across therapies. We also know, and again can't emphasize enough, how important it is for early and intensive intervention to occur, because that's what's associated with optimal income. And going back to what we talked about the cost to the society, so many of the related costs of care over the lifetime of an individual is not related to the core symptoms of autism, but more to the either the comorbidities or the resulting challenges in, particularly with regard to behavior, communication, and self-help skills. So the earlier that we can intervene, the less likely it is that the child will develop those additional problems that cause and result in challenges for the families and a greater cost for remediation and treatment. So we have to remember and recognize that families will continue to seek tools and strategies across a lifetime. And we've heard families, I had one mom, I asked her if I could use this, that she described it as climbing Mount Autism, and so we do use that a lot. You know, we can say it's a marathon and a sprint, and she said, it's not a marathon, it's climbing a mountain. But we can do it and we can be successful. We have to help parents anticipate and prepare for transitions. We have to empower families with skills and knowledge. We want them to become active participants in their child's treatment and in their child's educational and medical planning. And we want to join with our families and together become change agents.
Hello?
Hello. Hi. I think we've tried to go through this a little bit faster at a faster pace and not delve into as much details on some of the content so that there would be time for question and answers.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And actually, the presentation has been so very interesting. It appears that there's a bit of an echo. But we're actually going to get into the question and answer period now. And it sounds to me like really parents have such an important role in identifying the symptoms of autism. You know, unlike many medical conditions where, you know, there are tests, you know, blood tests and the like, it looks like it really depends very much on a parent's understanding of their child. That's a really big piece of being able to identify and treat this. And so I'm really appreciating hearing that. And I'm also concerned about the parents that, you know, are kind of getting messages from some of their healthcare practitioners to wait. So what is a parent to do in that instance? If they're getting that message, what would you recommend?
If they're getting the message to wait?
Yeah.
Well, to be honest, sometimes when we hear it, it's already after the fact, that the parent has heard that message and yet has decided to move on. But interestingly, we require a referral, and so sometimes we've had parents say, I've talked to my doctor, because we want them to engage in that conversation with their primary care provider. And if parents say their doctor is telling them to wait, we will either share information with them, we'll arm them with some facts and statistics, particularly the materials that we have available from the CDC, as Dr. Klayman referred to earlier. And the most telling one is that parent concerns often predate official diagnosis and referral by as much as 2 to 3 years. And,
wow.
And so we want to reassure parents that they are on the right path, and if they need to look for a provider who can work with them and support them. So the bottom line, the takeaway message. Yeah, the takeaway message is that if a parent has concerns about their child, particularly in the areas of social or language communication, and they're not meeting their milestones, that the parent should discuss that with their provider, and if they still have to have concerns, to go further.
And I assume in order to get the services that their child will need to begin to make progress, that they actually need to have a diagnosis. Is that right?
So I think some of that is state by state. So some states, particularly at the under 3, don't need a diagnosis. You either need to show some delays in your development, and it's different by different degrees. So some, it's 1.5 standard deviations in one area, or it just changes based on kind of the requirements of the early intervention providers. School districts don't always need a diagnosis. You just need to meet educational eligibility. But most of the time, particularly for insurance reimbursement, and lots of our families need more than might be able to be provided by some of the state-funded agencies, they will need to have a diagnosis so that insurance companies will potentially agree to pay for some of the services that they're going to get. So we can get.
So it sounds like it really varies depending on where you live.
It can, even in your neighboring communities, it can change as well.
Wow.
And so we're working really hard with advocating against state and national organizations to try and identify kids at risk, because we know that autism does unfold, and we know that there can be delays in getting a diagnosis. So we're trying to work with that to try and enable kids that need services based on their strengths and weaknesses to be able to get services that they might need. We're at the beginning stages of some of that, though.
And so where would you refer a parent that has some concerns? If they wanted to go on the internet, where would you suggest that they start? Because there is a lot of information on the internet. Yeah. Are there any particular websites or organizations that you would point to as a starting point for a parent that's trying to get some information?
Yes.
Particularly if they don't have a diagnosis yet, but they think that their child might need some level of service?
Yes, and what I'd actually like to do is just go back and elaborate on the point that we were just making. So early intervention, which is part of IDEA, is a federal program, and it's available in every state. And autism, while autism may be an automatic eligibility, if the child meets that delay that Dr. Klayman was talking about, that standard, they will get services. And it's very typical that children who go on to have an autism diagnosis get referred for speech therapy as one of the first services. And so going along with what you were saying, if a child is showing delays in speech and qualifies for speech therapy, I would urge every parent to go ahead and do that either while waiting for a diagnosis or prior to getting a diagnosis, because that would be the same intervention that would be recommended once they had a diagnosis. And again, they'd be getting the services as early as possible. It's also one of the reasons that the American Speech and Hearing Association is so actively involved, and so many of the leading providers and interventionists in autism are speech therapists, because they're one that, other than the practitioners and then maybe child care providers, are the first groups who interact with children on the spectrum. So having said that, the sources that we recommend families go to, Autism Speaks has a very, very rich library, lots of good information. They also have a series of toolkits for parents, and they also sponsor something that's called the Autism Response Team, and families can contact them by writing or through an 800 number. The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, if you go to cdc.gov/autism or cdc.gov/learn the signs act early, has a whole range of materials, reports, research findings, as well as very practical information under Learn the Signs Act Early for families of young children. They have milestones checklists, milestones booklets, very, very good tools. They also have some tips for parents about what to do while you're waiting for a diagnosis. The American Academy of Pediatrics also has a very, very robust web page of autism resources. And another excellent one is called the Autism Navigator. The Autism Navigator tool is available for parents, and parents of young children can go on that website and get content and look at videos of children, because a lot of the concepts that we're talking about may not be as familiar, but if you see a child, just like when we showed you those slides of where people look, you can see very quickly if we talk about a concept like joint attention, which is where a parent and child might look at the same thing and engage in a really nice communication through joint attention. You can actually see videos of children. You can see videos of children engaging in a tantrum and see the difference perhaps between a child who can transition smoothly and a child who has difficulties with transitions. So that's another excellent resource as well.
And I should say that we're actually going to upload on our CTAC website a tool. It'll be a resource tool which will have many of these websites that you're mentioning. So I want to encourage our audience that has questions or looking for resources and looking for information about evidence-based practices to go to our website. We will be uploading that tool. And so we want to thank our presenters so much for their presentation today, which was so informative. I have one final question. Much of our audience are behavioral health practitioners and healthcare practitioners that are working with families, and they're seeking to, in some instances, learn different ways of working with families to help them to address the needs of their children, whether it be to help them to thrive in school or in having easy transition and life skills in the home. And I wonder, are there specific resources that we can recommend to our professionals that are working with families that have children on the spectrum?
I think all of the references that we just cited have both parent and professional links. If you're talking about specific strategies, is that what you're thinking more?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so on the CDC website, there's, for the Learn the Signs Act Early, there's something that's called the Act Early Case Method of Instruction, and it's free. You sign up for it, and it's a tutorial based on case method of instruction series of resources. And the Autism Navigator tool also has a professional learning site. Again, you have to go and sign in, but then there's modules of training for physicians and child care providers. And if that's not your specific discipline, the content in both of those programs, one is really for medical and healthcare providers, and the other for child care, is excellent. And will give you lots of really practical information, videos, and excellent high-quality evidence-based training. Those would be the two that I would recommend right off the top.
Well, thank you so much. We very much appreciate today's presentation. And we want to let our audience know that we will be having a third part to this ASD webinar series. And it will take place on May 23rd, where we'll hear from Dr. Peter Gerhardt, who's the Executive Director of the EPIC School. And he'll be talking about transitioning age young people, looking at young people that are impacted by ASD in the adolescent phase into early adulthood. So that'll be on May 23rd. And we'd like to thank you so very much for joining us this afternoon, and we want to wish you a good afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.